Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the different constitutions of Texas. Texas has had 7 different constitutions, one starting in 1827 before we were actually a republic or part of the United States. Texas has a varied history with constitutions, but there'll be some major themes that we'll go through as we talk about each constitution, what their legacy was. So let's get right to that and talk about the different constitutions of Texas. And so our first constitution was 1827, and I'm going to use dates primarily because I find that that works better for people to remember. And so our first one was in 1827, while Texas was still part of Mexico. Mexico had gotten its independence from Spain in 1820, adopted a federal system that doesn't last too long and goes through some turmoil, but our first one is in 1820, and the major features of this constitution would be that there would be a unicameral legislature, which means one house. There wasn't a bicameral legislature. There'd be 12 deputies or legislators. There's a governor and a vice governor. The governor would lead the militia, be the chief executive officer. The vice governor is there just in case the governor died. All laws were written in Spanish. Makes sense. It's Mexico. The official religion was Catholic, although Anglo settlers could sign something so they were Catholic, but were allowed to practice any way they wanted to. Slavery was outlawed, and then, of course, mandatory military service, which, again, Anglo-Texans could get exempt for. Now, the impact of this Constitution on us is that a lot of our water and property rights that we have today are based upon our Spanish and Mexican heritage. And then the idea of local control of schools comes out of this. And this is something that really still resonates throughout Texas government. In 1836, March 2nd, there was a revolution. Santa Anna was going to seize control of Mexico. And by the way, if you haven't ever read a biography of Santa Anna, you really should. He's a fascinating character. There's a revolution. Santa Anna crossed the Rio Grande, or the Rio Bravo if you're in Mexico, and was going to make sure that these so-called Texicans would obey Mexican law. Well, Stephen F. Austin said, hey, look, we're a Mexican state. We want to stay a Mexican state. But as soon as the Santa Anna and his army crossed over, they go, okay, well, we're going to have to be independent. And so they're going to write a new constitution for themselves. And that'll be the Constitution of 1836, written at the place called Washington on the Brazos. Now, this Constitution is going to be primarily based on U.S. and Southern state constitutions. They didn't have a lot of time, so they copied a lot of it. It had 3 branches of government: judicial, legislative, and executive. A bicameral legislature. There'd be a House and Senate, president and vice president. They legalized slavery. And oddly enough, members of the clergy were not allowed to run for office. And they created community property rights. Now, the Texas Revolution doesn't last too long. There's the Battle of the Alamo, the Battle of the Goliad, and then the deciding battle of San Jacinto. Now, when Texas wins its independence, the first thing they ask to do is join the United States. And the United States will tell Texas no twice. And so Texas will be an independent republic from 1836 to 1845. It's not a very successful republic. They're broke. They don't have any governmental structure. It's a mess. They actually flirt with becoming part of the British Commonwealth. But eventually, Texas is annexed in 1845. The resistance for annexing Texas was partly because of slavery, and it could lead to war with Mexico, which it did. But at the same time they let Texas in, I believe it was Iowa that got in as a free state. So they maintained a slave state, free state balance. So when Texas becomes a state, they originally said, this is Texas. All of this is going to be Texas. As you can see, that goes all the way up into Wyoming. But part of the compromise of 1850 was that Texas would not get those boundaries because they wanted to save those for other states. And then they compensated Texas by giving them, I believe it was $10 million. So Texas has to write a new constitution. It's a state now. It's modern after Southern Constitution. Slavery still legalized. It incorporates the concept of Jacksonian democracy, which is this idea that you spread power out, because giving one person too much power would make them corrupt. You limit their terms, and originally the governor and everybody else served 2-year terms, so you'd elect them every 2 years. And this is influenced after Andrew Jackson. So you get a bicameral legislature. This will eventually also become a plural executive. It evolves that way. A plural executive means that not only do you elect the governor, but you elect the other members of the executive branch, thereby weakening the powers of the governor. Like I said, short terms of office. And at the time, it was considered a model constitution at the time because it created a permanent fund for schools, separate property rights for women, no state chartered banks. That's a Jacksonian democracy aspect. Texas, if it wanted to, could divide into 5 states. I don't know why they do that. The legislature met once every 2 years. Your private homestead could not be foreclosed upon. If you own your house and everything else, they can't take it away from you. Businesses can't. And if you'd ever dueled, you couldn't hold office. In Texas, unlike other states whose public lands went over to the federal government, they kept their public lands. So Texas has become a state. They worked hard at it. And then by 1861, they decided they're going to leave. Lincoln's elected president, South Carolina secedes, and then the Deep South, including Texas, follows in 1861. Of course, the issue was slavery. And Sam Houston, who had been a pro-unionist governor, had just been elected as governor. They removed him and said, we're going to leave the Union, and Sam Houston opposed that. Now, the question is, why would they, elect a unionist governor and then vote to leave the Union? Well, you can look it up on the Texas Handbook Online. There was a series of mysterious fires in the Metroplex region. And the rumor was it was blamed on abolitionists, and that caused an outrage across the state and led them to leave the Union. So Texas is going to write another constitution, 1861. Pretty much, it's pretty close to the 1856 Constitution, 1845 Constitution, except that it gave great protection for slavery. You could not free a slave without permission of the government. Aiding a fugitive slave was a capital offense, a death sentence, and you couldn't question the legality of slavery. That was a felony. So, as you know, the North wins the Civil War, and so Texas will have to write a new constitution, and we'll take that up in the next lecture.